let me introduce our guest speaker for today. We have Dan McIntosh with Smarter Spaces, and Dan is originally from Cape Breton Island and currently resides in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Dan is the COO of Smarter Spaces, and he comes with 20 plus years of project management experience in real estate and 20 plus years of experience in space measurement services. So please welcome our guest speaker today, Dan McIntosh.
All right, thanks a lot, Heather. Glad to be here today, and hopefully we'll share some information that everyone finds useful in understanding different aspects of the new BOMA Office Standard 2017 that is out, and we'll touch on some other aspects of BOMA and a few real-world scenario pieces as well. But let me just jump right into it. So as Heather mentioned a few things about me there, in addition, from service provider aspect, we deal a lot with existing conditions, BOMA measurements, virtual tours, emergency planning, and I come from a long line of project work on the real estate side. So a lot of experience working within real estate environment and in and around space measurement for buildings of all shapes and sizes. So a little bit of history there. Just about us first with Smarter Spaces. We are based out of Halifax. We service Atlantic Canada and Canada abroad. We actually are wrapped up a few projects out on the West Coast in Vancouver and most recently in Ontario and Quebec. So we do a lot of data collection on the ground, all of the production here in Halifax. So we do have the capability for the reach to different geographic regions. We do help clients with the data that we collect, make data-driven decisions with cost-effective and cost-effective decisions. We'll help them quantify, understand, and plan their spaces and environments that matter most to them in their business. So we have a lot of toys that we use when we're tackling our projects. I'll touch a little bit on some of that today, and what different service providers will bring to market when we're talking BOMA and the application of the standards. So we're glad to be here. So I'd like to mention that Smarter Spaces is also not an employee or reseller of BOMA International. We are not an official interpreter. We are a BOMA measurement and analysis service provider, along with many other things, but we do provide reliable square footage data to help individuals and companies who are leasing, selling, could be purchasing, insuring, or just in general managing a portfolio of properties. We are a member of BOMA International and also a member of the BOMA Nova Scotia chapter. Just a little bit of experience around around working with BOMA. As I said, we've been doing it for quite a while. We've touched on buildings of all shapes and sizes. Some of our more notable ones of larger footprint here in Halifax include a few of the pieces you see on the screen here today between TD Centre, Park Lane Mall and Terrace, Maritime Centre, and the Old World Trade Center here in Halifax. Their footprints are quite extensive, so some able to apply a lot of modern technologies in there to get precise data in order to really understand what's going on there from an accurate square footage perspective and how that reflects down through the numbers for those clients. Without getting too far into the weeds, just I'd like to talk a little bit about the tool belt piece as we kind of get into the standard itself. So within space management, typically all service providers are usually doing their charge or their cost points on a per square foot basis. In most cases, some use other models, but it's usually by the square foot. Our workflows will vary between providers depending on what arsenal of equipment that we do have, from the generic measuring tape to handheld lasers to mobile LiDAR scanners or terrestrial LiDAR scanners. And we're getting into that 3D aspect with the 3D scanning. It's really understanding what's the best tool to apply. They all have a variety of precision and range, so it's really important to understand when you're getting into that type of technology, understanding what you're paying for, what you're getting, and what you're hoping the receivable is going to be at the end of the day, the deliverable, sorry. As the client, you want to make sure that you're getting the best price, and most time that means sacrificing potential new revenue that you may not know exists. You may be looking to get something within a cost per square foot range that kind of falls behind where technology is today. And in that case, it's if cost is really a driving factor for you when you're looking at these types of jobs without using some of the more precise technologies that are out there, you could be leaving some revenue on the table that you may not even know exists. So I like to ask folks as far as how they weigh their accuracy requirements against their ROI. Do they understand exactly what the capture methods are that are going to occur on their project, and do they understand the precision points that they could be dealing with? And basically for your deliverable, do you know really what you're paying for at the end of the day? Within doing specific space lease exhibits, so when you're doing one unit at a time, there's cost points there. When you're doing an entire building and applying the BOMA standard, you're getting into a volume of cost, and so we always like to make sure that we're being as upfront with our clients as we can, so that we're giving them the information that they need to make great decisions. Starting point, we always like to understand when you're going to apply a BOMA approach, where the client is starting from an old record drawing. Are you dealing with a spreadsheet or a CAD file? Because that really will depend or give us a good understanding on where you believe your space is today, from how you're tracking it, how the frequency on how it's being measured over periods of time. This is a new project, a new property or such. So just understanding your starting point there is important for all parties involved. We like to communicate for everyone, just to let them know that the use of any BOMA floor measurement standard is completely voluntary. So it's up to the end user to determine if they want to apply that standard and methodology to their space within the industry, and how that's viewed and approached. Measurement matters, so just understanding the stakeholders that need this information to be key, between landlords and tenants, lenders and investors, appraisers and surveyors, sellers and purchasers, leasing professionals, space planners, interior designers, asset managers, and property managers. How a building is measured, the data that comes from that, and then how that is then applied to different methodologies, all has various impacts for the end user, depending on what their requirement is. So it's space measurements are important to a number of people. Today, we're going to be focusing most on the BOMA 2017 update for office buildings. I'll touch a little bit on the background on BOMA, highlight some of the other standards that are out there on the market. Specifically to this one, we'll talk about the purpose and the benefits. We'll touch on discrepancy and interpretation. With what's new out there, we'll kind of go through the list on what they've brought since the 2010. We will dive a little bit into a couple of those, into a minor piece. We won't go too deep here today. And then once you start applying those standards and then understanding your boundaries, your classifications, and then what that means beyond within the life cycle versus existing conditions over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of a building, and how BOMA continues to live with that building through all the changes that come over time. So just quickly on BOMA, it has been around for quite a while. The office standard since 1915. It has seen many iterations over the years. The most recent being what we're talking about here today with with 2017. So the committees that work on these standards basically keep those updates coming based on the needs within the real estate market, and adapting to the times, which is, it's good that we still see these updates, and even with some of the other standards, that there's even more current ones out on some of the other areas in 2018, 2020. So that's always great to see. Accurately measured buildings will help maximize value, minimize landlord-tenant disputes, facilitate common area recovery calculations, and aid in planning for new tenants and current tenant expansion and contraction. Really, that's what you're trying to achieve when applying any of these BOMA standards. There are different types. We're talking office today. There's a standard for industrial buildings, another standard for multi-unit residential, retail buildings, mixed-use properties, and gross area of buildings. So depending on what box you're working with, really you need to understand the difference between all of these standards so that you're applying the right methodologies for your requirement. What is a square foot? And with some of these slides, I'm gonna kind of get into a little bit more of the language here. Others I'm going to skip over and just kind of hit the high points. But when we talk about square foot and how that applies within the BOMA standards in practice, 1 square foot is not equivalent across all of the standards. A square foot of gross leasable area under the retail standard does not equal 1 square foot of rentable area under the office standard, or 1 square foot of rentable area under the industrial standard. Each standard does have its own methodology, which will lead to differences in certified areas. So you can't take retail standards and apply them to office standards effectively unless you're dealing with a bit of a mixed use component. But there are different instructions on how you cross over some of the standards with others, but you really need to understand each of the methodologies and what your do's and don'ts really are. If we want to get in now to the purpose of the BOMA standards, to promote clear communication among all participants in a real estate transaction, to provide consistent measurement of rentable square footage, and to allow accurate comparison through a clearly understood method of management. A lot of folks ask what the benefits are to really applying BOMA, and with the certification that ties in with that. So with most service providers, when they measure the space, they're going to give you a clean floor plan. They're going to give you a BOMA schematic that's color coded to the classifications. They're going to give you space certificates based on the occupant spaces, and then they're going to give you a global summary of areas which give you a spreadsheet view defining the calculation breakdown and how all those numbers reflect throughout. So within those certification, it's like you're really looking to maximize the asset value, increase the asset performance, prevent and resolve landlord-tenant disputes, accurately calculate and allocate expense recoveries, and confirm correct areas for leases. So there are a number of purposes, a number of benefits to the standards for giving you some reliable and information, and being confident or feeling confident in the data that you are working with. We do see discrepancies at times where, and I guess if I just kind of put it to the text content here piece first, it's not unusual for BOMA calculations produced by one party to differ slightly from calculations from another. Whenever measurements are within that 2% range or less than 2%, it's usually deemed acceptable. Where parties tend to contest or get into any type of a conflict on that, it's this 2% rule is usually the point where you want to get a third party involved. We've measured spaces where we've had this discrepancy in place. We've had other parties come in to validate. We've been asked to come in as a third party on different engagements as well. So it kind of hits both sides on different projects, but it's a great starting point whenever you're never going to have measurements line up exact when you're having different parties measuring space, measuring it different ways with applied technology or manual. So it's a fair checkpoint there within the negotiation process. On BOMA interpretation, as I mentioned, we're not an official interpreter. BOMA International does have official interpreters, and I've got those listed down below here with some of the contact information for those groups. Within the subcommittee, these folks will collaborate and respond to different questions that anyone can submit to the floor standards at boma.org. The BOMA standards are almost like the building code to some degree as far as interpretation, and will run into all types of scenarios in different buildings. Not all buildings are the same, obviously, and you're going to run into different scenarios that you may question when you're going through the standard, just not being able to find that exact answer. So this help desk through the subcommittee is a great tool. We use it regularly as well, and then we also try to help folks with just understanding it. But again, the official interpreters are there for purpose. They maintain keeping these standards working well for everyone and helping everyone fill in any gaps if should they come to a wall on anything. What's new in BOMA 2017? So with the IPMS compatibility, it was a big one for them, and we'll get into that a little bit later on here. Support for balconies, covered galleries, finished rooftops and terrace. So that's adding some rentable area within the calculations. We've got calculations for extended circulation and occupant storage circulation. Inter-building area has been fully implemented. Occupant area is now comprised of tenant area and tenant auxiliary area. Capped load factors applied to individual occupants. Interior gross area has been renamed to the boundary area. The height limits for dominant portions and restricted headroom are there. We've got width limits for unenclosed occupant circulation and base building circulation. There's major vertical penetrations at the lowest level are now included in rentable area. A lot of folks aren't aware of that. Public pedestrian thoroughfare condition has been removed. Enclosure limit condition has been removed. And then the floor amenity area has been removed, replaced by interbuilding amenity area. And then in general, overall, just a BOMA best practice has been incorporated throughout, overlaid with the compatibility with the IPMS, and just in general across all the BOMA practices that have been added, removed, or modified under this current standard. If we look at the IPMS compatibility, so within that, the BOMA office is fully compatible now with the International Property Management Standard for office buildings. Just a little history here is that BOMA is the founding member of the International Property Management Standard Coalition, and that is a group of about 86 organizations from more than 160 countries, so pretty impressive. The purpose of the coalition is to develop measurement standards that will be adopted globally to ensure consistent measurement methodology for buildings across the international markets. And BOMA will be incorporating those standards in all of its standards. So that's good, good stuff. On the support for balconies, covered galleries, and finished rooftops, With the increasing demand for well-appointed exterior amenities in office buildings, balconies and covered galleries, and finished rooftop terrace that are for exclusive use by a tenant may now be included in rentable square footage calculations. So adding more numbers there to the bottom line. Inter-building area fully implemented. Piece to note here that I've got highlighted is that the area does not change the total rentable area of a building, but it does allow for rentable areas to be distributed more fairly. When we talk about cap load factor and how it's applied now, it can be applied to individual occupants for a tenant by tenant basis. So the ability to cap the load factor will help landlords and tenants negotiate leases more appropriate to the market while still adhering to the standard. And within that load factor, it's just basically a ratio that's expressed either by a decimal or percentage, which is used to allocate that additional area to the occupants on a proportionate or fixed basis. With major vertical penetrations, now that the lowest levels are no longer excluded, that's adding to the rentable area. Although this change does result in a slightly higher rentable area, the change supports one of the basic rules of the standard tied to physical floor space is rentable area, and openings in the floor are not included in the rentable areas. So we'll see through some graphics here in a bit just how the major verticals kind of tie to that, and when we get into boundaries, what that really means within the major vertical penetration space. And then on the public pedestrian thoroughfare condition, where that's been removed, I won't get into too much on that one, but it was nice to see that that was addressed. Method A, Method B, we get lots of questions around these when we're talking with the standard. So there are two distinct measurement approaches. Both require the entire building to be measured, and the methods cannot be combined. When you're dealing with Method A, it determines rentable area by proportionately allocating shared services and amenity areas to building occupants using multiple load factors. And then Method B, when you're looking at a single load factor, determines areas by proportionally allocating shared service and amenity along with base building circulation to building occupants using a single load factor. With each of those, within your global summary of areas, there are distinct calculation methods that are applied that have a few different calculations than the other, tied to the different inputs that you would extract out of the drawing for each of those. And typically we would encourage to apply both methods onto the drawing so that you can understand what the difference is to those, and then basically take that information and apply whatever is the best method for you onto that calculation. When we're applying the standard, whether you're using method A or B, you will need to input some raw data into the calculations that you are going to extract from the drawings. You don't want to be interchanging metric and imperial units when you're doing this. And then as you're kind of getting into it, it's really trying to understand there's 3 steps in general that you want to be aware of as far as just establish the boundary area. But before you start to establish your boundary area, you really need to understand what those boundary areas, how they tie into your space, and where their wall priorities are, who's on the other side of the wall. A lot of factors come into play versus just making a boundary on the inside face of every room. BOMA's got specific instruction how you approach each standard based on the occupancies. And then that ties in with the classification of spaces within those boundary areas. So having that clear understanding of what every space is. And when you're measuring only a unit in a building versus the entire building, always understanding what's on the other side of that wall, the approach, the tools that you're putting to measure a particular space, because when the inside face, the middle point, or the outside face of a wall become critical factors, how the measurement is being collected is also very important, especially when you're dealing with a range between a measuring tape or a LiDAR device. Both are capturing that measurement criteria very differently. So it's to make sure that you're aware of those factors and that your workflow is tight for either that manual or more technical approach. When we start to get into the dominant portions, the boundary conditions, there's several different boundary conditions that we're going to touch on here. These next several slides are going to have a lot of graphics. I'm going to get into a few of them. And we'll just touch lightly on some others. If there are any questions from anyone around any of these next several slides, again, feel free to put them in the chat. And if we can't answer those today, we will definitely connect after this, and we'll share this PDF. So when we get into these boundaries, understanding the environment, understanding your wall priorities, you need to be thinking about the vertical as much as you're thinking about the horizontal within the space. And this is, we're going to show you a little bit of an example here that we kind of are tied to with when you're looking at the dominant portion on the floor to ceiling height. If you're at the 8-foot mark, if your windows or your glazing are taking up more than 50% within that 8-foot mark, it's really important as to where that boundary line gets placed. What you can see on the top here is where that boundary is currently located for the boundary area. When you're looking at it in the vertical and a cross section here, you've got an 8-foot mark line from the finished floor up. The window on the left here is taking up over 50% of that space. The one on the other side is not. So we can see where we're taking a measurement point on the glazing on the left side. On the right side, we're taking it from the inside face of the wall. If you're not thinking about these boundary methodologies and truly understanding them, you're not going to be putting your boundaries in the right location, which could impact you to the good or to the bad when you're going through your data and starting to input that into your global summary. If we were to look at these two windows here, for example, this is just a basic plan here. There's actually an image that's supposed to be setting behind this little arrow here that I can see on my screen, but it doesn't seem to be coming up on the presentation here unless it's on that screen there. But there's a picture here of one of the high rises in downtown Halifax pointing at some windows. And back to that other previous slide where we're talking about where the window takes up to 50% or more or less, really depends on where you're taking those measurement points from. So when you're looking here within these windows, just even the slight difference on where these windows fall above and below that line do play a part here. Cost-wise, you're looking at about $100 per year within the difference between these two windows. But when you're looking at a building that's 20 floors and has windows wrapping the building all the way around, you're looking at something around $140,000 per year of revenue that you're not capturing because you're not placing your boundaries in the right spot. So it's kind of a bit of semantics with the numbers, but and those numbers will calculate differently for different properties. But it's to understand where you're placing those boundaries, understanding the verticals on your glazing, because it does play a very critical role, and it could lead you to finding more space that you're not even in the know that you're missing at the end of the day. Some other boundary conditions that you get into with no dominant portions. So how that boundary again gets placed, it's just understanding the different features within the space. It's not as simple with these standards as just going in and placing a square around the inside face of the walls. It's when you're doing these BOMA analysis, you really need to understand the instruction as to where everything has to get applied and placed, and then exported and calculated. Other conditions tied to non-vertical building enclosures. So a lot of clarification as to where you're exactly supposed to place these lines, and where those measurement points do play a critical role. Exterior door setbacks. A lot of folks will miss this one at different times, but there's different procedures that you follow when you're running into these situations. We see this different times in buildings, and it does play a role in the numbers. So you want to make sure that if you're dealing with any projects that do have these types of architectural features in the space, that within your measurement calculations that you're capturing that information correctly. If you're adjacent to a building void, are your boundaries in the proper location? With that, same as everything else, depending on your edge and your railing and where your wall face is and where your columns are, there's different approaches here. We won't get into the weeds on these types of aspects today, but the graphics are good reference tools to use as a base point to understand how those relationships work with between those types of areas. When we get into unenclosed occupant circulation, again, different examples here as to how that gets applied based on the circumstances around the circulation, the extent of walkways, and how you're only extending and tying into certain tenant and amenity areas. So different features there that you do need to be considering. Unprotected exterior openings. I'll not touch too much on this one. It kind of gets into the principle around how to tie that information together, and you do need to understand some of your exterior property line information as well when you're measuring with these types of engagements. Your partial enclosures. These occur when the building enclosures in the areas that are not designed to have the same level of environmental control as fully enclosed areas. So where you're looking at your finished floor within these spaces tied to the boundary, again, it's a different application. All of these boundary conditions play roles in various areas of the building. So I like to tell folks that it's not a one size fits all. It's really understanding how all that kind of comes and plays together. Having this book at your fingertips is always a great help. And then again, with the BOMA interpreter aspect, there's good information there, good resources to lean on within any of these boundary conditions should you need to get further clarification. And then I'm going to pass beyond this one. We're just kind of getting into more of those unenclosed features. Property limit, again, it's just knowing where your boundary lines are to the property and how you kind of tie all that together and getting those lines placed in the proper orientation. Major vertical, it's an important aspect when we're kind of getting into the stairs, especially with some of the adjustments that they've made with the lower levels within the current upgrades. So it's lots of different features within buildings. Stairwells and major vertical play a key role, both structurally and within the makeup of the space. Stairwells come in many shapes and sizes, many footprints. So the graphics within this BOMA standard really gives you some good information to reference back to when you're trying to figure out exactly where you're placing these lines to get the measurements that you need, understanding what's on the other side of the wall from these stairs and how those boundary points are getting put through, and how you're extracting this measurement data out into your GSA. And then when you're looking at it both from a 2D view to your elevation views, is the relationship to how that circulation is tying in, where you have shafts within the space, how it relates to your tenant, your floor, and your building service areas. So it's all important information, and ties in with stairwells and ladders, and you'll get into escalators and all that fun stuff. Once you get your head around the boundary aspect, you're then kind of following through with your classification. So we're going to go through a few graphics here that more or less outline where we're at with different types of spaces. Your red line is indicating your boundary on the inside, the middle, or the outside. Really understanding what the relation is with the parties on the other side of the wall as to how you make that calculation. So you've got your major vertical and the relationships there, your occupant storage, your tenant area and tenant auxiliary areas, your floor service area, your building amenity. These graphics are all great tools when you're putting your BOMA package together to be able to reference your building service area, your base building circulation spaces. So if I just go back here for a moment, within all of these, and I'm just kind of cycling through here, then I'm not sure if you have access to one of the BOMA reports today, but this will be inside the PDF package. It's just great reference tools for when you're working on any BOMA project, is to give you quick indication as to where your measurement points are within the space. If we now kind of step back a bit and just look at how long the buildings last, and what this means, and what the tie-in with not just this BOMA standard, but all BOMA standards, really. It's understanding the average lifespans of buildings. There's many different types, but in general, if we just kind of use some of the rationale here, that buildings could be anywhere up to 50 years old after the time that they're first built, and even beyond. You've got original construction periods, routine maintenance periods. You get into capital renewal periods over different periods on an entire building, on a particular floor, on a particular unit. And then how you're getting into your adaptations and your upgrades as well over that life cycle. But when you're working with that life cycle from a BOMA perspective, anywhere you've got changes, you want to make sure you're keeping your measurements current and accurate, because that does have impacts to the numbers for your revenue. So you always want to make sure that you're working with the most up-to-date drawing and measurement information. When you look at a general project life cycle on how that ties through, there's a lot of different components that tie into that, to getting the building designed, either new or for, if it's existing, for fit up. When you're engaging your design teams, to your general contractors, and then what are the things that you need to do for occupancy in order to get in. So you got to get into some of your emergency platform pieces. But then tied into that too, it's just understanding, where does BOMA fit into this whole package. So I'm just going to give you a quick run through here on a life cycle scenario of a build, and what you need to be thinking about within this environment for BOMA. So if you end up doing any type of LiDAR scan for existing conditions, you're taking point cloud information, you're applying levels of accuracy and levels of design to put together a drawing package. By the owner having that existing condition package updated early on before his professional services are engaged, it's going to save them definite dollars down the road, getting their project either for a new build or a fit up project off the ground on the right foot. Because if you're getting your jobs off the ground with record drawings that aren't updated or out of date, or you don't have any drawings and you're starting from scratch, you're kind of setting yourself up for a little bit of failure on with change orders that will arise over the project that could hit up to 10 times the cost of what it would have cost just to have the building drawings updated very early on. So you really got to, with the client per se, you're really trying to get them to spend the money here at 1x so that they can avoid spending the money out here at 10x. You get your design teams involved. You may do some visualizations for the planning, but it's at this point you'll want to be thinking about a Bowman analysis, either again if it's a new building or if it's an old that you're fitting up, as to what are those Bowman numbers looking like inside the design plan, and what's that going to mean for the property? What's that going to mean for the revenue? And as this process just kind of evolves and you're starting to do construction, and you may do some other virtual tour information, you'll get into your emergency aspects, you get into your as-builts, space is ready, and now you got to really get into your final BOMA report and your unit classifications, so that you can start really tracking the numbers for the building as to what you can do with revenue as the building goes on in time, and you adapt to the changes, how you manage and control that so that you always have the most up-to-date information at your fingertips. Within one building, you take that life cycle that we just walked through and you apply it to the span of time when you're getting into all that routine maintenance, your capital and your adaptations, and how BOMA will always play a role within planning, and what's the impact, what's the changes to that, to the building based on, to the BOMA based on some of the construction that we're looking at. And then what that means at the end when you're finished those jobs and you've got to get the packages updated. So it's BOMA is always a touch point across the entire life cycle of the building. And if you're maintaining it from day one, you're going to be in the best shape going forward. But if you've got gaps along the way, as-builts that aren't being updated during construction, working from unscaled PDFs, it's just kind of opening the door to potential risk and potential loss of revenue or missed revenue opportunity. So you've got one building here. You then think about applying that to a portfolio of buildings and what that means over each of their life cycles and all the phases and applications throughout that within the measurement piece. Just a quick little story here at the end of around how to find $1 million in a space. I came across this article through Canadian Property Valuation. It was around a little store here in Halifax. And if you look at the market, basically through a semi-annual market survey and space measurement audit, it's discovered that the average lease was off by about 10%, with the average office tower in Halifax downtown at that time approximately 85,000 square feet, and average rents running north of $14 a square foot. That would and result in a loss of rental revenue over 5 years, roughly $600,000. And then from a valuation standpoint, the question then becomes, what will be the effect on the overall value of that building? And based on current market parameters, using a direct capitalization approach, the office tower would suffer a loss in value of almost $1.4 million. So scenarios like that exist when we're out measuring buildings. We'll find space, and you could run into situations where or the square footage we discover is actually less than what the owner thought that they had. But there's when you're measuring it, and you're more likely that you're going to find anywhere from 2% to 7% more space. You could be hitting the 10%, and it's just it's how you're approaching those measurements with the tools at hand, how you're understanding the BOMA methodologies, clear indication on how you apply the boundaries, truly understanding your classifications. All these things are all linked together, being a piece of that puzzle that you're trying to get to. And then when you have your updated drawings and all your outputs and your mathematicals tied together, you have the truest picture on what the size of your building is, what the composition of the building is, what the financial models for that building are. So everything is tied extremely close together. And when you're walking into a space with a measuring tape, or walking into a space with a handheld laser or a LiDAR, you're not going to get the more precise the technology, the better the result in the data, and the better information that you're going to have to work with. And now we're kind of coming to the end here. That went by pretty quick. You can get this information out at the BOMA store to get any of the standards off the BOMA.org website. And again, we're going to share the PDF with everyone later on.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. That was a lot of really, really specific, great questions that I felt like, even for us here locally, a lot of the questions we receive are around what is new and the measuring approaches, and is it exterior, interior? So a lot of great questions and a lot of great answers that I can have even work with here locally. We didn't receive any Q&A or questions, sorry, throughout. I'll leave it for another second there. But as we mentioned, it is recorded, and we will provide the PDF as well. It will be uploaded to our member portal. But like I said, this is a lot of really great information, different things I know I haven't thought about, but a lot of great answers to questions I know we get on a regular basis. So,
yeah. No, it's good. There were just kind of hope I didn't go through it too quick for everyone. There was a lot of slides there to touch on. I'm going to share this with everyone just so that you can have access to all the language. There's a lot of information there around just the boundaries are the biggest thing for me. If you really don't know how to place your boundaries, you're setting yourself up for failure right off the bat.
Right.
And then from there, it's just how you're collecting that information. And what you're trying to get to, and some of the decision making that you're putting in place to get to that point. So yeah, there's a lot of factors at play here, and then how those actions kind of reflect and stretch over all the different BOMA standards depending on the type of facility that you're actually trying to obtain data on.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a lot to take in, a little bit dry at times, but
it's really great.
It's really helpful information once you kind of get your head around it.
Yeah, exactly.